Hello, my name is Roy Oxnavad, and I'm here with Ricardo Palmerin, who is the Hispanic Coordinator of Hispanic Ministries for All People Initiative. Good to have you here with us, Ricardo.
Thank you, Roy. It's a pleasure for me to be here with you now.
Good. We're here going to be talking about church within a church. More and more people seem to be going with churches, ethnic groups coming to a regular church and wanting to have some kind of ministry or ability to work within that. But before we start with that, could you just tell us a little bit more about yourself and your ministry?
Yeah, as you mentioned, I'm the Hispanic coordinator in the Evangelical Free Church for the All People Initiative among Latinos. I'm also participate with the Great Lakes District as the Hispanic director, and I'm part of a pastoral team in Bensonville Bible Evangelical Free Church.
So in other words, you are actually living out the church within the church. You're talking from experience rather than just from ideas.
Well, I would say yes. I have some years to now experiencing how two congregations can become one body and share the ministry in the community. Mm-hmm.
Very good. Could you just share with us what a church within a church model is?
Well, one way to say the church in a church model is when a first generation immigrant church is coming and develop ministry in an English-speaking congregation. So it's when first English church is intentionally open to reach the Latinos or other ethnic groups in the community. Is when a church comes into another church, because this is the host church, it's a welcoming church. There are different levels of involvement, between both congregations. Is when usually the English congregation they are the landlords of the building, and the ethnic group is coming, renting the facilities, but it's more than that.
Okay.
It's more just than the landlord relationship.
Yeah, and just to let our audience know, there's sort of several different models of church within a church. As Ricardo has talked about, there is the landlord model, which is where where an ethnic group is looking for a building for their church, and typically they go to an Anglo church and they say, can we use your facility type thing. So that's sort of a landlord kind of thing. There's no real relationship. The next one is what we'd call an ethnic staff. And an ethnic staff model is where the church actually brings on staff, a ethnic pastor, and their full participation within the staff as a staff member, specifically working with that congregation or that specific ethnic or language group. And then the third model that we'll look at is the blended model. And the blended model is where both ethnic groups come together in one church service rather than two separate services. And there's the beginning stage of how that works, and then there's the mature stage of how that works. So let me ask you, Ricardo, of these kinds of models, which do you think, in your opinion, is the best model?
Well, I would say the best model for me is when there are certain conditions. For instance, is when, again, the English-speaking congregation has the intentionality to reach the community. I think when we have a congregation like that, we have a good church and a church model, because they will be willing to reach the community, to host an ethnic congregation. Usually ethnic congregations are looking for places to gather. But when there are the conditions that the English-speaking congregation has in their mission statement, their vision to reach the ethnics, so it's a different kind of relationship. It's not landlord-rental model.
Okay. Now, that would be the intentionality model of the Anglo Church or the host church to reach out to an ethnic group. So that is the best model in your opinion. But what's the model most often used?
Well, it's very common when the immigrant ethnic congregation is looking for in the community where to gather. So they are looking for our facilities. It's very common that they go and try to find the location. But when the English-speaking congregation takes the initiative, there is a good starting point again. So the best model for me is when both congregations coincide in their vision and mission. They want to reach the community. They want to reach the multi-ethnic groups in the community, and when the conditions, are set. Pastors, leaders, congregations, they make the decision, to reach others. It's the starting point, I would say. The initiative, it comes from the English-speaking congregation. The initiative comes from the Evangelical Free Church District. They put the vision before the congregation, and they embrace that vision. Or the initiative comes from a church planter among this ethnic group, that he presents his vision to a church. They adopt this vision. They help the planter to see happen, the church plant.
I know that I was involved with one church. There was an ethnic group that was starting to attend the church, two leaders basically of an ethnic group, and they were starting to gather people together, and a number of people came to know Christ. And then they thought, well, let's find a church. So they found a church, and they started meeting. But then it was, you meet when we're not meeting, and you use a room that we're not using. Mm-hmm. And as this little small congregation was beginning to grow, there was now tension between the ethnic church mm-hmm, and mm-hmm. the host church, which we'd call in the landlord model. So I finally sat down with them, and this happened to be a Farsi-speaking congregation, mm-hmm. And I laid out the different models of landlord, ethnic, blended, and I asked them, which one are you using? And they had said, well, we don't know. It just happened that this came together, and now we're all of a sudden, we're not too sure what to do. And as I showed the different models, I said, which one are you? And they said, well, we are a blend of several models because we don't know what we're doing. So what are some of the challenges that people face when they end up with these types of things?
Well, the first challenge that immigrant churches and congregations face all the time is the language barrier. No matter what is the connection initially, the language barrier is something that is challenging, because when leaders of the ethnic group don't connect well with the leadership of the English church, from the very beginning will be some kind of difficulties and problems. I remember a church who tried to find a place where to gather, went to an English congregation, and then start to attend without any reference, no agreements. They don't set what was the vision for the host congregation, nor for the immigrant congregation. So eventually they have problems in the relationship, in different manners. So I would say this is a challenge, the communication. The challenge for the English-speaking church is to be open. It's not just rental model. It's really to be open to those immigrants in the community. We have a say in my original country, Mexico. We say, mi casa es tu casa. Mm-hmm. My house is your house.
Yeah.
And I think this is a big challenge for the host church, to say mi casa es tu casa to an immigrant group, because that demands, definitely to have a new mindset, to be attached to what the scripture says is a mandate from the Lord to go and make disciples to all nations, to other ethnias. So when a church is open and tell to immigrants, "Mi casa es tu casa," this is they already, in that very moment, they face the challenge and they resolve. So it requires patient convictions, from the English-speaking congregations. Not only send missionaries overseas, but cross the street and reach the Latinos or other ethnic groups in the community.
Now, I've seen where the church inside a church model works quite well with, say, a larger church that has a big staff. They have a vision not only for overseas, but also for here in the United States. But it seems that a number of times churches that are in a dying mode, they're looking for another church to come to help, so there would be more people to use the church, and there's more income because they would need more income to happen. And there's not the vision like you're talking about here. And they become very protective. What are the advantages of in a church to welcome another church, an ethnic church, into it?
Well, you mentioned, and I think it's a benefit for an English-speaking church to be open to minorities in the community. It really is an influx of new life. The church recovered the vision to make contact with real people in the community. So they, for instance, have testimony, not from missionaries coming from overseas, but now they have a testimony how the Lord is working in the community with real people that is at their doorsteps. So I think the benefit is a blessing to have others. The blessing for the ethnic church is to find a place, is to connect with other culture, with another language. Their children eventually will find an English congregation who can do ministry with the children and youth people of the immigrant congregation. So there are benefits from both sides, and definitely when, again, both of them share their vision, they can see how the Lord is working and grow. There is a growing.
We've sort of talked about church within a church type of scenarios, but could you give us a story of give me two stories. One story of a good model of a church within a church that you know about, so not just sort of theory, but then also follow it up with a story of a church within a church that didn't go well.
Well, I have a very good example. This is a English-speaking church, Northside, Indiana. There is a growing Hispanic community around that area. Immigrants coming from Central and South America. And this church has the intentionality to reach that community. So they make efforts, pastors, elders, congregation, to find a planter and go to the community because they realize some Latinos start to attend the congregation in English. So they say they are attending to the English service, why not to have a congregation in Spanish? So they define a location, part of there were facilities that belong to the church outside the campus, and they said, well, let's have the Hispanic group in that location. So they invite some pastors and invite interns to try to do the Hispanic ministry. They tried several times. The congregation didn't grow too much in that moment, but they pursued, in that goal. Eventually, a local church planter arrives in that area and then make contact with the church, talk with the pastor, talk to the elders, and the elder says, okay, I give you the opportunity, take the core group that we have, some few Latinos, and try to start the ministry. So that planter was in contact with us. He received some theological training, some ministerial training. Eventually, they moved from that location outside campus. They moved into the campus. And it was a good move because in that moment the Hispanic congregation started to grow. It was successful because it's successful evidently because this planter eventually became part of the staff. Today he's part of the staff of the church. The Latino congregation, they have autonomy in their decisions, but they are inserted in the whole body, sharing the same vision, the same mission. So they start the churches continue growing. So there is some kind of integration, not assimilation. It's an integration. And now the effect is that the English-speaking church is becoming multicultural. Before that, they were monocultural, but after they received the Hispanic ministry, they got this vision to be multicultural.
Excellent, excellent. And I know a similar story in Rockford, Illinois, where a whole Laos community was moving in, and was a missionary who had come, had retired, had a real vision for it, and the church had been a church in downtown, and they had moved out to the suburbs. So they basically gave the downtown smaller church for this community of Hmong people to have a church and have their own, and the mother church really helped and came alongside, and now there is an autonomous Laotian church that is there and doing a phenomenal job. So yeah, there was a good stories. Now, could you give us maybe a story? And well, the good story was it doesn't happen immediately. There has to be intentionality.
Right, and took some years actually. It was not, immediately after they got the church planter, but it was the intentionality I mentioned before. Right. It was clear what they wanted, and so they can make agreement, in details, but also in the big picture. Not all the time happened that way.
Well, can you give us a story of when it didn't happen that way? Sort of where it went bad, and what happened, and why, possibly why you may have known why it went bad.
Well, there is a case of our church. It is an English church in the suburban area here of Chicago, but there was a Hispanic congregation. It was a small group at that moment, but they tried to find a place where to gather, and they were connected with the district. So eventually they find a location, and the English-speaking church was willing to open the doors for them. And actually they start to gather. They set, on the calendar the days that they would gather, the use of the facilities. But there were no clear agreement from the beginning. It was not clear the model they will follow. As you mentioned before, it was no clarity what level of relationship they will have. So it was a moment where the conflicts start to appear in the relationship because, for instance, the Latino group didn't understand what it was, the use of the facilities, and how important it was to follow some rules and some traditions.
Yes.
So it was a conflict where they realized that the use of certain equipment or certain room, they didn't understand why. So the lack of communication, results in conflicts in that area. But eventually, it was not only that area. It was some conflicts in doctrinal issues, and the lack of communication again. It results that leaders, they were not in close connection, and then it was misunderstanding. Finally, it was not clear, the model, it was not in a written form, so Latinos collect their offering and put in one place under the custody of the English-speaking congregation. The lack of clarity makes it difficult how to make decisions about those funds.
Okay.
And then it was not the best model. Finally, the Hispanic leader and part of the group decided to leave the place, and practically that initiative, it was dissolved. No, it was not prosperity in that sense. So it was not the best experience I realized.
Yeah, and it can be even more than just lack of clarity among the leadership level. I know of an Arab-speaking church that was renting, if you will, a facility, and there was clarity in regards to the leadership as to what they wanted, and from the Anglo side as to what they wanted to do. But it was a ministry that was an outreach ministry. So the people that came in were refugees, and their idea was, if you have all of these things in this church, they also then belong to us. Mm-hmm. So they started taking things that were in the children's room, which was crayons and pencils and toys, and then they also had ministry which was for homeless people, and they were starting to take some of the things from the homeless people for the shelter that they were doing there, and misusing the whole sense of facility. And finally the English congregation just said, you know, if you can't control your people, it's best that we just stop. So it can be the mentality of this other group of, they may not be Christians, and their idea of what church is might be totally different, and it then becomes very messy.
Yeah, and it's important also to work with the immigration group, that they understand really that how important it is for the host church to be in care, you know, and respect some traditions, etc. So when it's a good communication, it's not a challenge, you know, it's not a problem, but really when there is no communication, it's a conflict.
Now, we've talked about a church within a church, an ethnic church, but let's just say there's a church within a church and it's going well, and then it's been 5 years or something like this, and it's been two separate congregations. When or should the ethnic congregation and the Anglo congregation consider a blended service? When does that, should that be a consideration? Should that be a goal that you're going for? How would you suggest churches to navigate that?
Yeah, I would say first is because both congregations, they do ministry together before make that decision. For instance, children ministry and youth ministry is a good way, and visible way how both congregations can work together, because this is part of my own experience in church, and I see in other churches when the English-speaking congregation and the immigrant church, they share the youth ministries, is that the visible multicultural group in the church body. So when they work together, when they have the same goals, the same vision, I think it's a moment where they consider to blend. Something important for me is numbers. How large is the English-speaking congregation? How large is the immigrant church? As they are equals in numbers, will be easier for them make decisions, you know, and blend together, because they will be willing to share leadership, share authority, you know, and share everything. So that's, I said this is a very important issue. When there is majority group, difficult, they will like to blend, but they are in equal positions. Some numbers, they will be very willing to maybe to come together. So that's a factor I realize is important.
So what happens if the ethnic congregation is larger than the Anglo congregation? Does that make it difficult for going to, say, multicultural?
Yeah, it will be difficult, because sometimes happen that no matter the English-speaking group is decreasing, they don't want to share the control in the church. So they and again, they need to have very clear that they want to reach the community, that they want to extend the kingdom, and then the English-speaking congregation is open to the immigrant group to become multi-ethnic, multicultural church.
Okay. I know that one thing that is kind of that can come out of this whole model, and I'll use the illustration of a Korean church. And there was a cultural clash that was taking place within the Korean congregation. And some of the Koreans were going off to English churches, yet they didn't feel at home. And I've seen the same thing with Spanish churches. They're going to school, they learn English, and then go to an English church, but then it doesn't feel like home. There is this Latino cultural expression that's important, and for them that was the Korean expression, because they wanted Korean food, they just liked a lot of the things of what Korean culture was, but they didn't like the structure of the Korean church. So they hired a Korean English speaker to come in and plant a multicultural church that retained a lot of its ethnic identity, but in a different language. And what was really important with that is they gave the downstairs of the church to that English congregation. So it was in the same building, but autonomous in one sense. But it then expanded, and they didn't lose their second generation. They found a place at home where the cultural expressions were important. What about within the Latino community? I know that you can go multi-generational and still speak Spanish. But if those that are losing the Spanish and prefer English, what do we do?
Yeah, this is happening more and more among the Hispanic congregations. The second generation, they speak more English than Spanish. They want to keep the culture, the home culture. They want to keep the family ties. But in other sense, they are very willing to connect with the majority culture, all other cultures. So a difference among the Koreans and Latinos, I would say the Latinos, they are mixed more often now with other cultures. So to have a second generation ministry among the Hispanics is really thing into plan or start a multicultural church, because Latino second generation is the experience in my own family, my children. They relate with other cultures now. They love the Mexican culture, but the reality and the way they function in the community is multicultural. So now they relate with other cultures, and they attend a multicultural church. So I see the second generation Latino more willing to connect with other cultures.
Yeah, when I was church planting, I did a multicultural church plant, and we would have, and since there were a lot of singles at this point in time and broken families, we would have a big meal once a month. And we had stuff from Lebanon, we had stuff from India, we had stuff from Puerto Rico, we had stuff from Latin America, not just Mexico, but I mean in other places. But it was a smorgasbord of all kinds of food, and it was just really great to celebrate together, particularly around food. Most of the people that are watching this are going to be pastors, lay people, and is there anything else that you are aware of that we haven't necessarily covered that you think would be important to include in this video?
Well, I would say this is, I will encourage pastors and congregations to be intentional and to reach the community in that sense, and respond not only to demographic change in the community that is becoming multicultural, but I respond to the Lord's call to go and make disciples to all nations, that means to all ethnies, and then live the experience of transitioning to be a monocultural church, to be a church open to welcome others, to be a multicultural church. It's not easy. It's challenging. It's painful sometimes because it's leave my comfort zone. This is happening to all cultures, not only the majority culture. All cultures we experience that. To leave our comfort zone is difficult. So, but I will again encourage pastors and congregations, make the step, leave their comfort zone, try to reach the community, share their vision, share their mission statement with the immigrant group. Say to the immigrant group and Latinos or Koreans or any groups, mi casa es tu casa. I open my house to you because this finally is a Lord house. So when we open the church, we really are open the kingdom for others. So I will encourage pastors and congregations do the multicultural, multi-ethnic, multi-congregational ministry.
Thank you so much for sharing, Ricardo, your wisdom and knowledge and insight and practical experience that you've had in this whole aspect of church within a church. As well as we will have a document that talks about the different models so that you can see both the advantages and disadvantages as your church might be considering this type of ministry. And thank you so much, Ricardo, for what you have shared.
Thank you, Roy, for your invitation. And also I will say that we have in the HCA website, you can find Hispanic Ministries, and you will find there information in Spanish about the ministries we have around the country, several districts where we have church planting projects, so you're very welcome to visit us.
Please like, share these videos, and go to our website for more information.